Hello and welcome back to the Deskwarmers Podcast. My name is Matthew.
And I'm Ike. What's up?
Ike, what's up is I have a CC Lemon right here.
How did you get that, Matthew?
I know a guy who works for the Japanese government, and he was able to lift some restrictions on bringing this highly coveted item back to the United States. His name is Asian Supermarket. down the street that I got it from, but I've missed the CC Lemon so much.
Is that
awesome
your
to have it.
go-to drink, Matthew, from when you were in Japan?
It actually is. I would go to Family Mart, get the big CC Lemon with extra lemon, and a Fammy Chickie, and that would be like my afternoon snack.
So the thing I miss the most, though,
Yeah,
milk tea and matcha lattes.
Oh,
Yeah. If I could just hit a 7-Eleven right now, my life would be complete.
we can't talk about this, Ike. One, because it's gonna be hard on us. I'm gonna be very sad. But two, because we have a guest in our little waiting room, and we got to bring him in. Ike, would you like to do the honors?
I would love to. Today's guest, we actually have our very first CIR on the podcast, and I'm sure he would love to dive into that. But we have Luke. Could I welcome Luke?
Hey.
Welcome in, Luke.
Hello, I'm Luke. I was a CIR on the JET program, and I'm still in Japan, so I actually have my real life Famima cafe latte here to make you all jealous. Although I have a hot coffee as well, because I'm one of those person that always needs a lot of drinks. But it's a pleasure to be on the show, guys.
Wow, we're so happy to have you. Yes,
yeah.
And Luke, before we even dive into it, I mentioned you were a CIR. What does that even stand for?
It stands for Coordinator for International Relations, which, when it's said in English, sounds like a very sort of politics, diplomat sort of job. But in Japanese, it's Kokusai Koryuin, which is a bit more like intercultural exchange officer. So definitely they're trying to play up how it sounds with the English name compared to the Japanese.
Sure, I get it. It's all about the optics. It's about the sound of the name, how important your position is.
Even the CIR, though, that's one of two options from the JET program. So you were still employed by the same organization that Matthew and I were. Just we were ALTs, the assistant language teachers, and you were this coveted CIR. Your Japanese is crazy. You're doing things that we can't even comprehend. Yeah. Is that right?
Well, I mean, that's a very flattering way to put it, but... so I think my understanding, actually there's three types of positions on the JET program.
There's three.
So there's
three.
ALTs, which is the English teaching role. And off the top of my head, I think about 80% of JETs are ALTs.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's what I did, which is being a CIR. And basically you generally get placed into sort of local government, or it's very varied. I guess we'll get into the details a little bit more later. And then there's also this other mystery role that no one seems to have ever met someone do real life. It's called SEA, Sports Exchange
SEA.
Advisor. And it's where they take you to come and teach kids sports. But I've never met one in real life. They're a bit legendary.
I've never even heard of that.
Ladies and gentlemen listening at home, if you or a loved one know an SEA, one of these mystery JET program people, you gotta shout us out. You gotta contact us. We need this person on. We need to talk to them all about their role. We'd love to have an SEA. Ike's never even heard of him.
I didn't even know they existed. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So
I think I've heard of them. Some that come from Fiji and that type of area, and they often come to teach rugby and stuff like that. But I've never met one. I've never seen a British one or an American one. So I think it's a role that if you're listening in the West, you're probably unlikely to do. But yeah, we can maybe look that up later and see what it's all about.
That is really unique. I mean, even in our textbooks, we'd always have one chapter devoted to rugby, I feel like. Every single
English textbooks?
Oh, in the English textbooks that we would teach our kids, they would try to hit all of the different, cultural marks, but anyway, Luke, what was your main duties as a CIR? What did you typically do?
So the thing with being a CIR is that even compared to sort of the lottery that is the JET program for ALTs, it really is just an insanely sort of diverse role, and it depends so much where you're placed. So the most common thing as a CIR is to get placed in a local government. And basically the idea is that you speak Japanese and you speak English as well. You generally have to have Japanese about JLPT N2 level, so fairly good. And pretty much you are just involved in like helping your town along its globalization journey. You do things like translation and interpreting for like various events that happen. Some CIRs will go into schools. Some will like give English lessons, even just like the ALTs do. And then, for example, when I had guests, like international guests come to the town, I would like help with their schedules. I would translate when they had meetings. And then my favorite part as well was like I'd put on a lot of events. But it really is hugely varied. And to give you an example, so I was placed in a very small town of about 15,000 people in Kumamoto. The town was called Ashikita. I was placed in the finance and planning division of the town. Actually, specifically in the, how should I say in English, like basically the post-flood recovery division. So the town had actually been really badly affected by a flood. And so I was in the like recovery division of the government. And with the idea basically being that like through sort of international exchange, I was going to breathe some new life into the town after a disaster. But so that was my experience. But I had another friend who was on the same, like they started the JET program the same time as me. He was placed in a bonsai museum.
Wow.
As a CIR.
As a CIR. He was in a bonsai museum in Saitama. And so his job was like, he was like writing all the like descriptions for all the different bonsai in the museum in English. And like
That's
sometimes
cool.
like they'd have like foreign visitors come that were interested in bonsai, and he would like attend the meetings and like show them around and all that stuff. I think he was involved in like the museum's English social media pages as well. And then another friend, for example, was placed in like the education department of a local government. And he was pretty much doing very similar to what ALTs do. But like that town wanted someone that spoke quite high level Japanese because they didn't really have much English capability. So it really is, you could be doing anything, I think.
Yeah. So Luke, to kind of like sum it up a little bit, if a local government wants someone or needs someone to have this international background, definitely an English background, right, to help them out with maybe a specific project, like, I don't know, the flood recovery or even a bonsai museum, they can apply for that through the government, or the government will help them get set up through the JET program, which is through MEXT, right? And
I think the JET program is done through MIC, the Ministry of the Ministry of Internal Communications, which is the body that oversees Claire.
Got it. So anyway, that's just to say, if you're a CIR, you're working closely with the government rather than schools.
And Luke, remind me, during the process of becoming a CIR, did you actually like check that off or choose that in your initial application, or was that something that they like decided for you during the process?
Yeah, so when you apply for the JET program, you can check whether you want to be a CIR, an ALT, or I think an SEA as well is the option there. And for us CIRs, we had the option of, if we're not accepted as a CIR, would we like to be considered as an ALT? And that was a very nerve-wracking decision for a lot of us that applied for the JET program, because a lot of us so I studied Japanese at uni, and so a lot of my friends were applying for the JET program. A lot of us were we really wanted to be using our Japanese in Japan, so we kind of didn't want to do a role that was involved teaching English. But at the same time, we were like, but could I say no to the opportunity to go to Japan? So we were all like, really dilemmaing over what to do about that. And I actually ticked no in the end. So
you did.
So I'm glad that I got the CIR one. Yeah, but one of my best friends from uni, he ticked yes, and he ended up actually becoming an ALT.
Wow,
interesting.
I almost wonder, like, part of me, like, did that influence the process for him? Like, if he had clicked no, would it have been like he would have gotten a better chance at a CIR versus you that clicked know to actually only be eligible for a CIR. But
Essentially doubling down.
Yeah.
That's what we were all discussing. And that definitely came into my mind as well. Yeah.
I think it is really cool, though, as an experience, because I also took Japanese in university, but I did not have the confidence nor probably ability to actually be a full-time CIR. And I know that for you, your Japanese level is very high. Like, we saw you even during our like annual like conference, and you would be like a translator. And so there was a lot of these like active participations that you partook in or like were kind of assigned to in even just all of Kumamoto prefecture. But did you think that this was even a better way for your Japanese to improve?
100%. I mean, the town I lived in, I was actually the only jet in the town I lived in. There were a couple of English teachers with Interact, which is another company that does English teaching, but I didn't really have any communication with any of them. I mean, in my workplace, not a single person spoke English. So yeah, it was just the full-on immersion environment that you could be in. And because it was such a rural place in Kumamoto, like the joke is that like standard Japanese isn't even good enough. You have to speak in the dialect. Otherwise, you won't be able to speak to the people around you. You know, and now living in Tokyo, when I could tell stories about my time in Kumamoto to my Japanese friends, they can't even believe like the type of stuff that I was saying, or like the type of languages that we were using there. But yeah, the full on immersion environment, I mean, it flew my Japanese right up. It was so useful for getting better.
Yeah, and for Kumamoto Ben especially, I took a short class during that like annual conference, and the issue with me was that my teachers, whenever they would speak to me, they would want to kind of dilute their Kumamoto Ben. They would want to only speak in like standard, like elegant Japanese. But it seems like for you were able to actually get that more like genuine language experience. Is that how you felt as well? Or do you think that,
I think possibly that's true. Possibly perhaps the people that I was working with were just not used to working with foreigners. So something that's really interesting in Japanese government is that every April, everyone changes around department. So for both CIRs and ALTs, when you start jet, you're assigned a supervisor, right? A tantosha, we will say. And so I was assigned a tantosha, and within what would have been like sort of 5 months of joining, April came around, and my tantosha changed. And so I was in the finance and planning department, and my tantosha at that point had never been a tantosha. They'd never like supervised a foreigner. He actually went from the finance and planning department to the pipes and plumbing department, which is just incredible, right? Just to think that, you know, insane. Without any specialization.
What does that even mean? That's what I'm thinking right now. Like pipes and planning.
That's where I had to go to pay my water bills every month. So it's got something to do with that. But I think, like, you know, if the pipes burst in the town, then like that's the department that goes and fixes it. So like they really have to get some skills. But then my new tantosha actually was an 18-year-old who just joined. So obviously he'd never, you know, been that exposed to foreigners. And so going back to the Kumamoto Ben, they're not used to sort of speaking in easy to understand Japanese. They don't have the experience of trying to make their Japanese easy to understand. A lot of them, I would talk to them, they actually don't know what is Kumamoto Ben and what's standard Japanese, because the area they don't, do people in Tokyo not say that? You know, would be something a lot of them would say, especially the older people. And then within the town, like, you know, I was in a tiny town, about 15,000 people, but the town, you know, has different areas and districts. And particularly among older people, you know, people in this area speak a different dialect to people in this area. And it's only a 10-minute drive.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
that's crazy.
So Luke, one of the hypotheses, this is a slight tangent, but I would love to explore, is that in the coming years, in like the next 20 years of Japanese civilization, they will start only speaking in katakana. Because
I've heard this.
Typically, right, like you mentioned, these older generations still very like prefecturally based, like very heavy like slang accents. But typically the younger populations use a lot of these like new slangs, new like cool hip verbiage, and a lot of that actually comes from English. How do you feel about that as someone that's probably more experienced in dealing with these, you know, more regular speaking Japanese people?
Well, it's funny because like there are sort of jokes amongst the Japanese learning community that like the more advanced your Japanese gets, the more English katakana you use. So like when you first start learning Japanese, you want to try and avoid katakana because you want to prove to Japanese people that you actually know the Japanese word and you're not just sort of like, you know, trying to say the English word in a Japanese accent. But yeah, I mean, particularly Japanese people are like slightly exposed to English. They love to just throw katakana in. And so, for example, yesterday when I went into work, there were no women. So we're probably about half and half women and men at my workplace at the moment. But I went in and I was just like, "Akyo wa all the boys, isn't it?" And like that's like like instead of saying in Japanese like, "Oh, we're all men today," it'd be like, "All the boys, isn't it?" And like that's something that comes across as very native, which is really funny to think because it's like you go in a full loop.
Yeah, I think this is a good bouncing point to talk about, Luke, what you're doing now.
It's true.
Sure. So, shall I go from sort of how I moved from being a jet into what I'm doing now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, whilst I was a jet, I was sort of looking for a lot of jobs, and I got this sort of recruiter come to me for a job that's basically like sort of connecting foreign companies to Japan. And that was called We Connect, and apparently, like they really hunt for jets.
Wow.
And so I moved to Tokyo for that job. And on the first day, I was like, "Oh, I hate this." So I started looking for another job, and I actually only did that one for about 3 months. And that was a pretty tough period, to be honest. But so I then found this job. I work at we're an advocacy and communications consultancy called APCO. And basically, we are involved in like public affairs and stakeholder engagement. And our clients are normally, they're like the Japanese department of a foreign company. So unfortunately, I can't say the client names, but you know, generally like the Fortune 500 companies.
Sure.
And so we do a lot of like government relations stuff. So for example, a company which I cannot name, but a leading company of short-term rentals, like where you rent out rooms for people to stay in. They're very, very regulated in Japan. You can only rent out your room for 180 days out of a year, so you can't do it as a full-time business. And so they want, you know, restrictions for that sort of regulation. So myself and my company are involved in, for example, taking them to the Diet Member Building. That's like the Parliament building in Japan. And like having meetings with politicians, and like we'll set up study sessions and stuff to talk about like the future of Japanese tourism and like how we can ease regulations to, you know, to help everyone, sort of thing. And we do that sort of thing a lot. It's a very varied role. It's quite so it's an American company. About 2/3 of us are Japanese, but the Japanese people are all very international people. And I'm having a great time, to be honest. It's really great.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. It sounds like you went from being a CIR bouncing around to becoming another CIR.
So in my job interviews, I definitely played up the whole like, "Oh, I used to work in local government" type of thing. And sometimes I decided not to name the JET program. I just say, "Oh yeah, I used to work in a local government in Kumamoto," and it was like, "What? Yeah. But you're white," you know.
Now, I think that's another good segue too. Like a lot of our listeners are people that want to know Japanese or want to better their language skills. How do you think you were so successful in reaching this N2 level or just this CIR level, just even in your college years or even once you got to Japan? What was some of the main ways that you were able to like study Japanese, I guess?
Your keys to success.
So there's a few things. I think I was blessed in terms of I decided to do Japanese as my full-time university degree. So my degree was obviously in the UK. It's called a joint honors, Japanese and Spanish. I think that's pretty similar to what in the US you call a double major. But the majority of my university time was spent studying Japanese. And I have to, like, honestly say if university was not forcing me to study Japanese, I probably would not have succeeded just doing it by self-studying. But things that made me able to get to a high level is studying really hard, obviously, is the first one. And I think particularly vocabulary with Japanese, because unlike other languages like that are similar to English, Japanese vocabulary is just completely foreign. And if you don't know the vocabulary, you won't be able to speak. And the grammar you can kind of fumble through, and it doesn't matter if you mess up the grammar every now and then. I still do all the time. But with the vocabulary, you really do have to have that there. Otherwise, you just can't speak about any topic. So I'd say the first step is to just really try and memorize some vocabulary. But then on top of that, you just have to be putting yourself out there and speaking to Japanese people as much as possible. And so even in uni, I would be seeking out Japanese people. And so like we had like a Japanese society. And like we had a pub social. I know this all sounds so British, but like we had like a pub social every Monday, and it'd be like the Japanese society pub social, and Japanese people would go, and then other students would go. And every single time I tried to speak to new people in Japanese. And when you do that, it's just so important not to worry about making mistakes, because people get in this mindset of like, oh, I want to say this, but I'm not sure if it's this grammar, or if it's this grammar, or if it's this. But like, Japanese people are so happy that you're trying to speak Japanese, and even if you don't get your point across, you'll still like make connections. And if you make mistakes, often they'll say, oh, actually, you should say this. And like getting over that barrier of being able to talk to people, even though you're still at a beginner level, I think is the number one really big thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a guest on, a Japanese teacher of English that was in our town, and that was like her number one biggest piece of advice for people coming is just to don't be so caught up in your head about worrying, am I going to make this mistake? Like, just go for it, because the people you're talking to are going to cheer you on every step of the way.
Yeah.
No one's going to be rude about it.
Like as ALTs as well, I'm sure you see the same thing like for your Japanese students learning English, right?
Yeah, for sure. And the time it actually resonated the most with me was during a trip I had to Okinawa. And if you're familiar with Okinawa, it's mostly like the foreigners there are there for like military, right? Or like US people that don't really know any Japanese or haven't taken an interest in like Japanese culture, language. And just being there and like being able to even say like a sentence, like I'm talking like a taxi driver or like at the kombini or whatever. And like the people there were so grateful that like you even had put in any effort. And like that had a big impact on me because I was so like just they were so happy that we could even try, right? And at the end of the day, that was all that mattered, right, Luke? Like even if we made mistakes, and I actually think too, you did an amazing job of this, because one of the events I went to that you hosted as a CIR was this like international exchange event. And during that time, you advertised to both Japanese people and like foreign people. And you said, hey, please come here. Like half the time will be Japanese, half the time will be English. And that was a really fun time for me to push myself in both Japanese, but also just to like, we also as native English speakers, we want to help Japanese people learn English, right, as well. So I think that was a good opportunity for that. But what was that a typical event, or was that something that you came up with as a CIR?
Yeah, so I get to talk about my events. So as a CIR, again, it does depend a lot on your placement, but one of the things that we definitely find the most fun is holding events. And it depends so much on your placement, but in my case, I was given a lot of freedom as to what events to do. And so a lot of CIRs will host sort of like cultural events where it'll be like, they share food from their country or things like that. But in my case, like I'm really, really passionate about languages. And I also felt that I was in a quite unique position in that because I did speak Japanese, I had quite a strong connection with my community. And I wanted to share that with, other Jets that were around Kumamoto, and also the Japanese people that I knew. So this idea was pretty much, it was completely my idea. And it was a language exchange picnic. I'm calling it Global Picnic. And
Yes.
yes, thank you for attending. It was great to have you.
So much fun.
And essentially, the goal is that people can come together to practice each other's languages and to make friends with Japanese people and with foreigners. I mean, a very, very low pressure environment. And so this is something that, to be honest, I put a huge amount of effort into. And I managed to hold it 3 times in Kumamoto, which I was really happy about. But basically, I would have like these 2 big tarpaulins, blue sheets, that would be like where you sit for the picnic. And one would be English zone and one would be Japanese zone. And then I put people into groups. It would normally be about 2 foreigners and 3 Japanese people in the groups. I mean, then depending on what zone they're in, that's the language that they have to speak. And then I made these like question cards, and the question cards had different colors depending on like how difficult the question would be. So like the green one would be like, what's your favorite food? And then, you know, it'd be like beginner, medium, difficult. And the difficult ones could be like, I don't know, what effect do you think AI will have on society? And like for those that like really are really quite advanced sort of thing. And then, you know, I just change the groups around, like give people free time as well. And yeah, I found that really rewarding that, you know, foreigners and Japanese people in the area were able to make friends with each other. They were able to practice languages. And I was really hoping as well that like they would lose this sort of perfectionist mindset of, I have to really eloquently say what my favorite food is. Where if you just say hamburgers or whatever, like they understand and you can bond just over that. You know?
Dude, this is so natsukashi. I
actually have on
very
my desk.
Nostalgic.
I actually have on my desk now some of these cards actually.
Here we go.
I literally printed them out and laminated them and cut them myself, but they look kind of like this.
Oh wow!
And they're like the different.
He's got the resources.
These are the Japanese ones. I've got some English ones somewhere.
And I will really appreciate Luke though too. Like this event was so fun because not only like I think typically whoever you are interacting with, you will either choose English or Japanese, right? And I think typically, like for me especially, like I would just default to English, even though I knew a decent level of Japanese. And I think this event really allowed me and the people around me to just like practice both, right? Where it was like we would spend equal time for me to learn as equal time for you to learn. And I think typically when a Japanese person like sees a foreigner, they are going to want to try to speak in English. I think they are going to assume that we cannot speak any Japanese. And sometimes that's challenging for us too, because we want to practice our Japanese, right? And so I really did enjoy this event from the standpoint that it gave us equal time to like do both, basically. And so it was a really fun time that I had where it was like, you know, you decided when we were going to choose that language, and then we had to do our best in that different time periods. But
and that point about like Japanese people generally assume that if we don't look Japanese, we don't speak Japanese. That was also something that I was trying to combat in terms of this event, because a lot of Jets do speak Japanese, you know, and like, you know, a lot of us, I mean, most of us, myself included, definitely don't speak it perfectly. But wanting to try and change the perception of just because someone doesn't look Japanese, it means they understand zero Japanese, was one of the goals of that event. And a lot of Japanese people came to me afterwards and they were like, wow, I can't believe there's so many foreigners that can speak Japanese. And, you know, I was really happy to hear that feedback.
That's good. Yeah. That's really good.
In fact, I actually had one time when I was walking through my town, I mean, because my town was so local, it was normal that when you walk past someone, you'd say hello, you'd say konnichiwa to the person, right? And there was this mum with a young kid, and the young kid said konnichiwa to me. And before I could reply, the mum scolded the kid and said, like, hey, he won't speak Japanese, you have to say hello. and so I had to say back, like, actually, I look like this, but actually I do speak Japanese. You know, and that type of perception is something that I'd like to change.
Please say hello to me.
You know, you do want them to say hello to you, right?
Yeah. I want to jump in with my perspective for your events. When I went, I think it was the second or third year you put it on, and Ike, we didn't go together for whatever reason. I think you were out of town for something. So I want to give a big Deskwarmers shout out to Paige of episode 2, Paige's husband, Steven, and I went. It was like my first time hanging out with her husband, alone. Just the two of us drove down to Ashikita to go to your language exchange. And I remember this because we were like last minute additions. I think you had to make a couple extra cards or like put us in a group that we didn't initially belong into. And it was really funny because I was coming in to this event like, okay, I have around an N5 level, maybe not even that. Like if I'd taken the test, I probably wouldn't have passed. But Steven was coming from absolute zero.
Yeah.
And being at an event like that with someone who didn't speak any Japanese at all, it was so cool to watch everyone kind of just help each other along, help him along, but help me along as well. And it was very nice. I remember sitting on the very edge of the blue tarp that it was the Japanese only zone. And me and Steven were like, okay, we can speak like half Japanese, half English if we sit on the edge of this area. We're half in, half out. It was just a good time. Good vibes all around. Right at the beach. It was awesome.
Well, you allow me to do a bit of self-promo now. So I actually did these events in Kumamoto and they went very, very well. And I'm glad to hear that you two enjoyed as well. And so I'm actually now in Tokyo, sort of as a side hustle. I'm trying to do it in Tokyo as well. And
nice.
My goal actually is that I want this to expand back into rural areas of Japan, because I think there's something really special about the rural areas in which the Japanese people there have very little exposure to foreigners. And so it's a really special moment to like help them engage with the foreign community. And then there's a lot of, often Jets, often other foreigners, maybe they're English teachers with Interac or the people who come on technical internships. That for people that don't know, they're generally sort of Southeast Asian people that come to like work in agriculture, or sometimes you can see them on konbinis. And those groups of people feel quite isolated from their communities often. And so bringing it back into the rural areas is something that I'm really trying to do. But at the moment, I'm holding them in Tokyo. I've got one coming up in about 2 weeks. So if anyone listening wants to follow at Global Picnic Japan on Instagram, then please do give us a follow. Please do support.
Yes.
We'll leave the link in the description.
Yes. Yeah, you deserve the shout out, Luke, because I think it was a real, like, you went above and beyond your duties as a CIR to actually host these events. And I think, like Matthew mentioned too, it made, no matter what level you were or what proficiency you had in the other language, just feel very comfortable. So I think that was fun for everyone involved. Now, I know as well in your city, Luke, which actually Matthew and I did not have. I wanted to bring this up at some point in the podcast, but you had an American restaurant.
Oh my gosh, you're not talking.
The name I will freely shout this out is Oruganto. And this restaurant had hamburgers, pizza, sandwiches. Like, the owner lived in the US for several years and then came back to Japan to open this restaurant. And this was another opportunity that even in this very rural area, we had to connect with people that could speak English or would like want to speak English, right?
Yeah. So actually my town was so small that actually the restaurant you're talking about was in the city next door to my town. But people seem to think that we're the same because we're just so small.
It was close,
but,
right?
It was very close. And I did go there frequently. Yeah, Oruganto. It's a wonderful restaurant. Maybe you can put the link in the description there too, because they got banging Instagram.
I'll put it down there. Yeah.
But that was a cafe that was like burgers and sandwiches style, run by this guy, a Japanese guy. I actually forget his name now, but he was super cool. And yeah, like you said, he used to live in the US. I think he told me
he lived in like Tennessee, I think.
Yeah,
I think it was like Tennessee or something.
He just like went to the US with a guitar and was like busking to make a living for ages and like traveled around the US. I'm not sure how he ended up making such great burgers and cafes. Because like I shouldn't be the one to judge this, but like from what I hear, they're very genuinely authentic, very delicious burgers and sandwiches that a lot of the Americans in the area really liked. I mean, he was so friendly, and this is something you get with the rural communities. But you go in and you actually get to know the owner, right? Like, unlike in Tokyo now, I don't really know many of the owners of cafes, but we can have this conversation years later about like, oh yeah, the owner of that cafe, he was busking around the US, and you know, you can tell we know him well. And actually,
I love that.
And actually, that cafe, having a good relationship with that cafe, that was where I used to put up the posters for Global Picnic. Actually, at that cafe.
No way. Yeah.
And we had quite a few Japanese people come because they saw the posters at that cafe, and it was a great, like you said, it was like quite outgoing, internationally minded Japanese people would go to that cafe, and it was a really great sort of space for communities.
Now,
really, as a sorry, Ike.
Go ahead.
As I was just gonna jump in and say, like, meeting people who own restaurants as a Jet in the Jet program, or just as a foreigner living in Japan, like you said, Luke, great way to meet other people. But I think we have like countless stories about us befriending restaurateurs and people who just own these small little just delicious restaurants. They're delicious with delicious food. Not the restaurants themselves are delicious. The food they make are delicious. But like we could talk about the Italian restaurant. Oh my gosh.
So Matthew and I,
dude.
Especially, we had lunches. We didn't have Kyushoku. We didn't have the cafeteria. So we could go to these restaurants. And I would go to these places like once a week. I'm talking like this Italian restaurant, Thai restaurant in our city. And I got really close with the owners because they would see you so often and you really do stand out. But it was a good experience to not only like speak some Japanese, but also just to get more like connected with the community and like develop relationships. But what I was going to say before that, Matthew, is I actually have two major pieces of beef with Oruganto.
Oh,
two. I'm talking two right here.
He's a hater.
The first, the food delicious. The owner is amazing. These two reasons are not stopping you from going, but I need to share them. The first, this place does not know how to spell hamburger because the menu, I'm talking the windows, I'm talking like 6 different places in the restaurant. It says hamburger, but each one has a different spelling, and every single one of them is wrong. And I don't know how it happens, but Luke, I think you can agree with me on this. Somehow, every single spelling of hamburger is like mistaken.
Completely true. And what's so shocking is this owner, and like even those of us that do speak Japanese, we spoke to him in English because he had like a completely fluent American accent.
He was good.
Like,
he was good.
He speaks English. Like he should know how to spell hamburger. But yeah, I also like massive writing on the window, and normally it would change the U for an A or something like that, which you see a lot in Japanese English. But I can't get my head around how that happened.
I don't know. Like the window would say something, and then the menu would say something, and then the printed menu would say something. Like every single version had a different misspelling.
All different.
So that's reason one. Definitely is not stopping you from going, right? Second reason, though, I ordered this pizza. It's not necessarily American pizza, I'd say. It had like tomatoes, some other stuff. There's like whole tomato slices. I personally, I've become more adventurous since coming to Japan. I hate tomatoes. I will not eat tomatoes. This pizza had like whole slices on the side. Like not on the side, like on top.
That sounds like your fault because you hate tomatoes and you ordered a pizza with tomatoes.
It is fully. This is not a burnt.
That's how Italian people make pizzas.
Okay,
that's a proper margarita pizza.
Anyway, let me finish what crime they did to me, because we order this pizza. I eat like half of it, delicious. I pick the tomatoes off, right? I put them on the side of the plate. I then say, this other half of the pizza, I would love to take home. Please give me a to-go box. Japan, sometimes they have to-go box, sometimes they don't. This place, great. They have to-go boxes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
The waiter comes back. They bring me 2 different things. One, pizza. Another is like a coffee cup. I'm like, oh, cool. Did they give me like some like dessert or coffee? Because it is a cafe at heart. I'm like, did they give me like some like bonus or something? And so I wait till I get to my car. I open the lid to this coffee cup. Do you know what was inside? The tomatoes that I had picked off the pizza. I had picked every tomato off the pizza. They then decided that I wanted them and put them inside a cup to give me to go. I was like, I understand where they're coming from, because in Japan, like, mottainai culture, like, you cannot waste, like, eat everything on your plate. Like, I understand that. What I didn't understand is it seemed like, you know, I took them off. Like, it should have been, like, trash, I guess, or something. But anyway, I got this cup of tomatoes. I had to take it home. I threw it away. That was
at least they didn't put the tomatoes back on the pizza. Like, at least they kept
they did not. They did not put them back on the pizza. It was separate. It was separate. Anyway, both of these points that I'm complaining about has nothing to do with the quality of the restaurant, because it was amazing and the owner is very nice and the food was delicious. But that part made me a little, you know, saddened. So
you got no beef with the patties.
Yes.
But you got beef with the pizza. Even though you got tomatoes on the pizza with no beef, probably.
What I think
probably
happened there is that so of course the owner of this shop's like really friendly, speaks really fluent English, but
yeah,
not all of the staff necessarily speak fluent English, and when they see like foreigners, you know, they can be a bit nervous of communicating with us. So I reckon if you were Japanese, they probably would have asked you like, would you like the tomatoes as well? Or should I throw them away? But because they were a bit nervous to ask you that, they just went for the safe option and gave you the tomatoes rather than, because imagine if they'd thrown them away and then you said, what? I paid for those tomatoes, you know, and they would have been in trouble. Yeah. So they took the safe option, I think.
Good point.
Yeah.
Hey man, I understand how it happened. It was just crazy to me, because something like that would, like, I feel like never happen in the US, right? Where it's like, they clearly see that they're like taken away. They're not going to give you. I don't think
that's necessarily true.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, depending on the restaurant, I think that, like, you know, you want to get everything out of your meal. I mean, exactly to Luke's point.
Yeah.
You know, why would they be so bold as to assume you didn't want the thing that they gave you?
You know, at the end of the day, it's my fault for not asking for the pizza without tomatoes, right?
Yes, you ordered the pizza like that.
So I get that, but...
And honestly, oftentimes in Japan, you know, they won't even let you change your order. What is on the menu is what they're serving. And even if it's something so simple as like, oh, I would like this hamburger without onions sometimes. Or I would like my ramen dish without any negi on it. And they're like, sorry. I can't do it. You always get that same reaction. It's like, well, we're not going to ask the chefs to change the menu. This is the thing that's on our menu. You either order it as is. We don't really make exceptions. But some places will let you, you know, mix and match.
There's a lot of like impliedness with Japanese, right? Where if they say, oh, like it's a little, like chotto, that means like no, basically.
Yeah.
But this is a good question for Luke too. Do you feel like that is only in rural areas of Japan, or because you've lived in both this Ashikita and Kumamoto and also like Tokyo, do you feel like there's a big like disparity or gap between those, like living in those different places?
Honestly, I would say the biggest culture shock of my life was moving from Kumamoto to Tokyo. Like bigger than from coming to the UK to Japan was moving from that tiny little rural town to Tokyo. Was just this insane culture shock. I mean, you know, you guys lived in a pretty rural place as well, but like, you know, every bar you go to, they know you. It's either, oh, I haven't seen you in a while, or hi, nice to meet you. This is my name. Right? Like, you go to get ramen, and at the end of the meal, they're like, oh, my uncle harvested too many tomatoes. Would you like this massive bowl of tomatoes? You know, like my neighbor.
I like that.
My neighbor would constantly like knock on the window and be like, oh, I made too much curry. Would you like some curry? You know, and I walked like a 1 minute walk to my workplace. I used to cycle to the beach after work. It was, you know, such a strong sense of community. In Tokyo, I live in a block of flats. There's, I don't know, probably like 20 flats in this building. I don't know the name of a single person. I mean, this is pretty standard, like rural, urban stuff. But if I want to see a friend, I have to get a train that takes like generally at least half an hour. Like when you go, you don't say hello to people on the streets, definitely. And in terms of, but back to the sort of like, is the mindset different thing? Definitely yes. A lot of restaurants are very westernized, I'd say. They're very used to foreigners asking them to change the food, and even Japanese people will ask them to change the food sometimes. In Tokyo, it's interesting about the language stuff, because the big thing that's a real shock, I mean, I suppose it makes sense, but is in Tokyo, I'm not special. And that was a bit of a pill to swallow, because in Kumamoto, when you're on jet and you're in the inaka, you're special, right? Just by being somewhere, especially if you speak some Japanese, but even if you don't, just by the fact that you're a non-Japanese person in Japan, you are special. But in Tokyo, you are the train I get every morning. There are foreigners from all around the world doing all types of jobs, sometimes wearing suits, doing whatever, and they live there, and they're normal people working there. And me doing the same thing does not make me interesting just by that. But I actually have to like have something interesting to talk about for people to be interested in me, you know. And that was that was definitely a bit of a pill to swallow.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think there's a certain probably high number of people who do end up going on the JET program get put in these pretty rural areas, rural communities. I don't want to say that they have some sort of like complex about them of being not self-important, but like thinking that they are special. Because like in a way, like they definitely are special, because us, like what we used to be, and maybe some people who are on there now, you know, are probably the only fluent English speakers in their area for miles and miles and miles. So there is something special about that. But I think, and this is not like a review of like every ALT or CIR or SEA on the JET program, but I think it helps to kind of just take a step back, being like, okay, I am doing a job. I have to realize that like my value is more than just I'm this special English speaker. Like I do have internal value as a human being living in this community, but like I'm not some sort of celebrity, or my job and my ability to speak English doesn't make me a celebrity, and I should like kind of use that to my advantage. You know what I'm trying to say?
It's a difficult rope to walk. Is that a phrase? It's a difficult like balance to get right, because people do see you as different, and people treat you differently because of that. You know, often that involves like the most incredible customer service and like inviting you to dinner and like, you know, all these like difficult rules that Japanese people have to put up with. They don't expect you to put up with that. But also it involves sort of excluding you from things in which you want to be included. And you have to sort of find the rope to walk, like find the balance. Whereas like, you know, people in the rural areas, like lots of the people in my town had never even left Kumamoto, like let alone left Japan. And so things like, oh, in the UK, do you have chopsticks? You know, like those sorts of like quite general, just talk about your hometown questions are very interesting to them. Like, oh, in Japan, we have this. Do you have that in the UK? Like that sort of conversation can be super interesting to those very local people in the rural areas. In Tokyo, no one cares about your home country. Like, you know, they care, you know, they'll try and talk to me about like intellectual property rights. And I'm like, fuck. Like, it was so much easier to make friends when I could just tell them that, like, yeah, I'm actually quite tall in the UK as well, you know? Like,
Ohashi jozu.
Yeah, I know.
When they hit you with the, wow, you're really good at chopsticks. I do completely agree with you both. Like, I feel like for me, part of the nostalgia of living in rural Japan was just that you were special, right? Like, in the US, like, no one cares. Like Europe, anywhere else, like we're just there, right? In Japan, when 99% of the population is like homogeneous, and like you are the only person that speaks a foreign language, like it makes you stand out. But once you go to Tokyo or something, they're much more used to tourists. They're much more used to like people of different cultures and countries living there. I think it does become a little challenging, but that was definitely something that after I left, I really appreciated Japan for. Like just going to a bar and people wanting to strike up a conversation to you about like, where are you from? Like, oh, like, can you speak Japanese? Like just anything, right? Is it's a cool situation to be in.
Yeah. So I mean, honestly, it's great for your ego. I loved it.
Yeah.
And like,
It's maybe a little
yeah,
too good.
yeah.
I will say that you definitely have to take everything with a grain of salt because like Luke and Matthew just said, your ego will be stroked. Like being in a very rural area, people will say you are the most attractive person, that you are the funniest person, that you are the most cool person. Like even if they know nothing about you, right? Like you say konnichiwa and they're like, wow, you are the craziest person I've ever met. Right? So
Can I tell a story?
of course. Every time.
So I went to the same 7-Eleven on Wednesdays and Thursdays, I think about every single week that I was in Japan. And I got to know the people working at that 7-Eleven not super well, but towards the end I was having conversations with them in my much improved Japanese over time.
Yeah.
Just like those 2 mornings. So they would always expect me. And then like when one of them like got a new job and this was her last week, like everyone was telling me how they're going to miss her. And she's over there in the corner. Like, yeah, I'm going to miss this place. So I got to know that these were like friends, but like not really friends, but I still think very, friendly of them. But on my last day, I was telling them, hey, my last day in Japan's coming up. Like I'm going back to America. My job as an ALT is over. I even brought my mom in the week before. And I'm like, this is my mom. She's coming here to see this town before I go back home. They made for me a video of them, pictures of the things that I would buy at 7-Eleven every morning. Like I got a chicken tonkatsu sandwich set to sad music on my phone. And like an onigiri and like a Pocari Sweat and a coffee and stuff like that. And it felt really, it like made me feel super special. Yeah. For kind of no reason, for just going to the store so often. Yeah. So I don't know. It's these small town relationships that I very highly value now after having gone through this experience. But man, I just had to bring that up. That was one of the most interesting things that happened to me. I think.
That's so wonderful. Like when you leave, it's an emotional roller coaster, isn't it? When you leave,
it really
is.
No, I love that too, Matthew, because like I said earlier in this episode too, like when I went to lunch at I had a ramen place, I had an Italian place, I had a Thai place that I would go to like every week almost. And these owners I developed this relationship with, and when I told them that I was leaving, like they each gave me different gifts. And something like that like made me feel really, unique, special. Like it like the relationship felt really special. And even when I go back to Japan in the future, like if I'm in my city, I want to go to each of those places and like talk to those people again. And so that was something that like I definitely miss about being there. Like in the US, wherever you're living in America, like you go to some place, right? And like, sure, you can develop a relationship with like the owner, but it's definitely more challenging, I feel like. So, but please.
No, but it goes back a little bit to the like speaking to the owners of cafes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But probably my best friend in Ashikita was a girl who was just 1 year older than me, and she owned a cafe called Melt Stand, which I think you two may have been to. Yeah,
that was good.
And
Melt
so
Stand was good.
God damn, this was such a cool place. So like this girl had turned this sort of like old traditional Japanese house into a sort of kind of Mexican restaurant, and the food was definitely like a Japanese version of Mexican food, but definitely very tasty. And she had yummy, quite a hippie vibe going on. She was, like she didn't speak any English, but like she was very interested in like sort of international culture. And I became really good friends with her. And again, I used to put like posters for Global Picnic in her cafe and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And we went to karaoke together a few times, like with other people. And I've actually slept in that cafe like 3 or 4 times, because the first time I went, I just heard about this mystery cafe in the town. And of course, when you live in a town that only has like 3 cafes, like discovering a new cafe is like, oh, what? There's a cafe? No way.
Wow.
And so like I went with one of my Japanese friends who was also, maybe we'll talk about this later, but another Japanese friend who was new in the town. And like we went to the cafe at like 7 p.m. and we just saw like these two girls sitting on the sofa drinking. And like we knocked and she opened the door and she was like, oh, actually we were going to close tonight, but like if you want to just come in and drink with us, that's fine. And so we went into the cafe and we were just like drinking till like gone midnight, you know, and that was sort of the start of the relationship there. But since I've been back to that cafe loads of times, they have like parties where they get DJs, and like went to their second 2-year anniversary party, and like her friend was DJing, and I just like slept on the sofa. And this is even when I was living in Tokyo. Like I flew back to Tokyo the next day, you know. And that those types of relationships, those types of spaces that they make that are like really welcoming to people that want to socialize and make friends are just so valuable.
Yeah. And I mean, Matthew and I, we experienced the same thing too. Like in our city, we had this bar, Campagnola, which we talked about in a previous episode as well with Quinlan. And that bar, he would close the bar when people left. So that meant that whether it be 12 o'clock, 5 a.m. in the morning, whenever the last customer left, that's when the bar would close. And in America, it's very different where like 2 a.m. is the cutoff. Like that's like,
everybody
everybody out, like you're gone. Like in these more rural towns, it was like, you are welcome as long as you want to be there. Like we will have fun. We will keep the place open. Like you can keep drinking, whatever you want to do. Like that definitely makes it like more meaningful from just like a connection standpoint, as well as like just being in those different locations, right?
Like going to a house sometimes, isn't it? It's just like going over to your mate's house. It's great.
Yeah. No, I loved that part about Japan.
Yeah, and Ike, the bar 2 floors above, Hayes Bar, Hayes Bar. He brought his PS5 in there. The owner brought his PS5 and he was like playing, I don't know what he's playing. He was playing some game on it like while we were in there. We walked in like, can we drink? This was New Year's Eve, by the way.
Yeah.
Which most, at least in rural Japan, a lot of bar owners don't want to be open on New Year's Eve because they've got family stuff to do. But a couple of us managed to find the one bar that was open, and he's like, I got some, what's that soup that they eat on New Year's? Like the oden. He's like, I've been making some oden.
And he just gives it to you.
You want some? And so we got free oden. It was great.
I love that. It's really special. But
yeah.
Now, Luke, I know earlier we talked about how you were able to develop your Japanese and stuff, but is there any tips you would advise the listeners to? Because I do feel like you had a lot of friends that were Japanese, as to how to put yourself out there or really like just try to form those connections better.
So I think the first one is to just go places yourself at the start, because you're not going to have any friends when you get there, and you have to just go places. And especially if you're in a rural area, and especially if you speak a little bit of Japanese, go to a place yourself, sit and have a meal by yourself. You'll probably start talking to the owner of the restaurant. And just try and make it as known as possible that you want to talk to people and that you're happy to do so in Japanese. Even if your Japanese is quite a basic level. Like the idea that people don't have to worry about speaking to you because they don't speak English, that they can speak in their language to you, and that's fine. A really funny one that it took me a long time to learn at my workplace was that, I'm not sure if this would have happened in the schools, but everyone brushes their teeth after lunch. I was not ready
I will
for that.
say that part is disgusting.
Oh my lord. But so I used to not do that for a while. But then I realized that like brushing your teeth is like where the friends group go. So like there were lots of different like sinks and kitchens around the government building. And like all the friends groups from different departments, they'd like go and like they'd brush their teeth together and chat. So I decided to like go like, oh, they look kind of cool. I'll brush my teeth there today.
Yeah.
And then I spend like 10 minutes having a like, like this with a toothbrush in my mouth sort of thing. And
it's like finding someone to sit with in the lunchroom or something.
Yeah,
wow.
And that was pretty successful. And then the other thing that worked really well for me, and this is probably quite specific to my situation, but I was quite lucky that in my town, there were a lot of Japanese people that were in the town from outside of that town. So there were a couple of programs. One of them was called the Chiki Okoshi Kyodokutai. No, how do we translate that? Called like the Regional Revitalization Squad, should we call it? And basically that's this program in Japan that's almost a bit like a domestic jet program, where sort of generally young Japanese people from the cities are just paid to go temporarily to the rural areas to try and like help rural revitalization. And so they'll arrive and they're similar to us. Like they don't have any friends. They're looking for people to be with. And so, you know, discovering Melt Stand, I actually did that with one of my friends from the Chiki Okoshi Kyodokutai. And there was this big community of like people from outside the town, inside the town, you know. And then the other big one that, again, I was lucky to have in my town were people from JICA. So for people who don't know what JICA is, it stands for the Japan Institute of JICA. It's called the Japan International Cooperation Agency. It's basically the Japanese version of USAID, which unfortunately no longer exists, but we'll skip past that. And that agency, so basically they have these volunteers, Japanese volunteers, that will go abroad to volunteer in generally developing countries. But before they do that, they have to do like a 6-month stint in some town in Japan. And in my town, because it was just destroyed by a flood, and they would come to like volunteer with the recovery process after the flood before they would go to, for example, my friends were going to Rwanda or to Senegal or to Palau. And they were quite young, internationally minded. So they were really good sort of candidates for becoming friends, I guess.
Yeah, sure. That's a really cool program.
Yeah, it's sick. And, you know, a lot of them are now in Tokyo, so I hang out with them here too. Yeah. Like the one that's just come back from Rwanda, he's like obviously Japanese. He's got like full-on long dreadlocks and everything now. But and
that's awesome.
Show me the video of like when he went to this salon in Rwanda and they were like dreading his hair.
Now, Luke, as we are kind of starting the wrap-up process, I'd love to hear, because the podcast name Deskwarmers, right?
Yes.
Us ALTs in the JET program, we have a good amount of time typically to where we don't have to be working on our actual job. Is the same to be said of a CIR? Did you have free time when you didn't have like tasks that were required?
Okay, so I think desk warming as a CIR actually is a completely different game. Because of course it depends on your placement, but the biggest sort of challenge for me or problem that I had, particularly at the start, was that I didn't actually realize what my job was. And it turns out, I didn't get given work. I was meant to come up with it all myself. So I sat there for the first like 6 months being like, can I help with this? Can I help with that? Do you have any work for me? And people would just sort of tell me like, oh no, that's not your job. That's not your job. Without telling me that I'm meant to just come up with shit myself. And so when I eventually realized that, that's when I started like doing that event and doing all, and occasionally, you know, they'd be like, oh, there's a foreign guest coming and we need you to translate, or like this thing's happening, we need your help. But like the vast majority of the time, I would not be assigned work. I had to come up with it.
Interesting.
So I would basically spend my desk warming time coming up with ideas for what to do for work. But there's a process. And the process is you have to make a proposal of like what you're going to do. So say it's an event, like, you know, you make the proposal for an event, you put all the information of the event, you print it off because Japan is still in the 1970s. And then I would have to like put this bit of paper at the top that has room for all of my superiors' stamps. And so I'd put the paper to my supervisor, and if he approves, he would stamp it. And then it would go around 4 other people in the office, and they will have to like give their stamp to say that they approve.
Wow.
And often if they didn't approve, it would come right back to me with a red pen through something. And I would have to change it.
Would it typically get approved then? Or was it typically like you had to revise something?
Normally it would come back a few times, And then I would have to like change that little bit and then submit it again and wait for it to go. And then eventually when it's approved, then I can actually do it. That was, you know, once I actually worked out that process existed, because no one told me I had to do that. You just had to like look and see other people doing it, you know. Once I worked out that existed, that's when I started to actually like be able to do stuff. But even during that time, like, you know, say I'm working on this event, I submit my thing for approval. It might take like 4 days for people to actually look at it. And in that 4 days, what do I do?
Yeah.
You know, so I used to, I mean, on the bad days, I was just like reading Wikipedia. I was on like the CIR forum, which is like a sort of really old school forum that CIRs have where they just complain about their jobs. You know, ideally, I would be like trying to come up with new ideas.
Wow.
But towards the end, I found myself fairly busy. So I haven't actually gone into like what I did as a CIR, but maybe if I just go through like in my experience what I did. So like planning events was definitely my favorite part, and I did that completely on my own. I also used to go into like nurseries sometimes or kindergartens, and do like English lessons with kids. But that would, rather than be sort of like supporting English, this would be like I would completely lead the lesson. And so, like, I had to like plan the lessons, do the lessons, and you know, it's mostly games. They're children. I teach them like the color blue and sort of thing. I also used to write articles in the town sort of newsletter. Is it called? Like every month there'd be like a newsletter that's delivered to everyone in the town, and I had like my Luke's intercultural corner sort of thing. I used to like write an article in Japanese about like whatever I've been up to that month or whatever, pretty much anything that I wanted to write. Then there were times when like international visitors would come to the town. So for example, one of those times, my town was really famous for these types of, how do you say that in English? Matchlock guns, I think it was. These like really old school guns that like samurai used to use were like really famous in my town. And we had this like
2 episodes in a row we're talking about old guns.
We had like this American gun specialist come to the town to like study the guns. And he was there for a week, and so I had to like chauffeur him around everywhere and like translate for him and stuff like that. That was a very interesting one. There were times when, I mean, this is ridiculous, but like when the Queen died, the mayor of my town wanted to write a letter to the Queen, to the UK royal family to like express his condolences. So I translated his letter to the Queen. Well, no, not to the Queen.
That's
crazy. To the royal family sort of thing. Random translations like that. So I was sort of, you know, doing my best. Oh, and I also started an Eikaiwa, like an English conversation class. But with that one, I like, because I wasn't associated with like a school or anything, I had to like basically run it as if it was my own business. So I had to like make posters for it, like put up the posters around the town, and like make the Google forms so that the people could sign up. And then I used to run that as well. I think that's pretty much. Oh, the other thing I did was I was meant to be like doing the town's international PR, so like advertising the town to foreigners. So with this guy that was my friend from the Chiki Okoshi Kyodokutai, who actually had like video editing skills, we made like a YouTube channel for the town to sort of like talk about like tourism in the town. The whole point of the YouTube channel was like, you know, Genki, my friend Genki, is like, I've moved from Tokyo to Ashikita, and Luke has moved from London to Ashikita, and this is our life here, sort of thing. And unfortunately, that didn't go on for too long because Genki quit his job. But that was.
I think I saw that video.
That was fun. Yeah. That was fun stuff too. So there was just so much going on.
So do you feel like you were pretty busy on a day-to-day basis then?
No. So I mean, now that I work like an actual office job where I have like emails and Teams messages and phone calls from clients and stuff, like working in Kumamoto, like putting on picnics for your job was like an absolute dream, you know. But like when I look back upon my time there, I really did do quite a variety of things. But certainly that starting period where I didn't know I had to come up with my own work, that was just the slowest, like, what on earth is going on?
I can imagine,
Yeah. But I mean, basically, if on my laptop the text on the screen was in English, then no one's going to ask what it is because I can't read it. So I could just do what I want, really. Yeah.
And that's your job is kind of English,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. So I could be reading. I remember reading about like Scandinavian gods or something at one point because that was just what's on my mind at that point, you know. Someone asks what it is, I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm planning for an English lesson or whatever.
Yeah. Nice. So Luke, let's go back to the very beginning of the conversation. If you right now were in a position where you're thinking about checking that box, if you don't get the job as the CIR, would you want to be the ALT? And this is, you could use this as advice for people in this position right now. Do you think that was a good decision? How do you kind of reflect on your whole time as a CIR?
Well, in my case, I think it was a good decision because I got the CIR job. So that was very lucky. And getting the CIR job has, I mean, that was like the one thing in my life that's got me to where I am now, I guess. Like, I have a job I enjoy in Tokyo now, and if I hadn't come on the JET program, then I would not probably be doing that at all. If you're applying for the CIR position, I mean, you just really got to ask yourself, like, do I really want this job because of this job, or do I want it because I want to go to Japan? And honestly, either answer is fine. Like, loads of people, the reason they do it is because they want to go to Japan. And I don't know. A lot of people would say, like, why would you turn down the offer of a job? And like, that makes complete sense. And there are a lot of ALTs as well that, if you're thinking about being in Japan for a long term, a lot of ex-jets become, they stay living in Japan for a long time and they do very interesting jobs. And a lot of them were ALTs. They were English teachers. So I think being a CIR definitely has some sort of uniqueness and some advantages that I was saying in job interviews in Tokyo. But especially if you can speak Japanese, like maybe you don't speak Japanese when you first apply for JET, but if you can sort of study Japanese through JET, and then you want to do job hunting, for example, in Tokyo afterwards, being an ALT still makes you very employable. And actually, everyone's aware of the declining population in Japan. And of course, that has its own problems, I'm sure many listeners are aware of. But one of the big advantages of the declining job population is that the job market is actually very healthy because there's a lot of positions open. And I actually found it surprisingly easy to get a fairly good job in Tokyo. And a lot of, not necessarily at my current job now, but I have a lot of friends who are foreigners in Tokyo that they did the JET program, they were ALTs, and now they're just doing like all this random stuff. They work in like the tourism department, they're working in like politics stuff, like some of them are engineers. Like, so if your goal is wanting to work in Japan, then being an English teacher is it's probably the biggest route into doing so. So yeah, don't turn down the opportunity, I think.
Yeah. So when this episode airs, I believe almost all of these shortlist announcements will have been given out. In fact, they might even already be out. It's literally any day now for those eager applicants. So, we could be seeing some new CIRs pretty soon. Do you have any advice for them?
The new CIRs, clarify what your job is, because and be ready that other people won't know what your job is. Yeah. Definitely a big thing. So I said at the start about like the way people change departments. That people are busy, like they don't know. And when you apply to be a CIR, it'll say something in English along the lines of like, CARs help with translation and intercultural communications within their municipalities, something like that, right? And then the Japanese people where you're going to work read the exact same thing. And they think, oh, we've got a CIR coming to help with translation and increase localization within the internationalization within our municipality. And they don't think that they're going to have to actually tell you how to do that. They think that you're just going to do it for them. So you need to just clarify, like, what is my job? What are the expectations? Because in my case, I wasn't given work generally. But the guy at the Bonsai Museum, he was given work. He didn't come up with anything himself. And so it's super, super varied depending on what you get. So just trying your best to understand the role. And also understanding that you are different. So something that really peeved me off was that even though I was like basically fluent in Japanese, working in the finance and planning division of a local government, they still wouldn't like let me into like a lot of the meetings they had and like the group chats they had because I was like a temporary employee. I'm a contract employee compared to them being full-time employees. And like that used to really annoy me because I used to be like, I want to be part of the team sort of thing. But I think accepting that like you are in a very unique position, and that's why you don't do overtime, for example. Like the other people there are often in there, like some of my managers would be there till like 2 a.m. It was insane. But trying to like express that you're willing to be incredibly involved and come up with ideas, but also accepting that you are different. You know, you're not like you don't want to be like going through those really long Excel documents about like old people's addresses and stuff. Like, that's not what you're there for. You're there for your uniqueness and just trying to play into that.
Yeah. I think that's well said, Luke, too, because I think our favorite slogan on the Deskwarmers podcast is MSAS, actually, instead of the typical every situation is different. We like to say many situations are similar, because we think many people that are maybe becoming CIRs or even ALTs as well can relate that your job might not have as much definition as you want, right? That you might have to come up with those aspects of how you work and how you spend the time. But at the end of the day, I think you did a good job of going above and beyond what the expectation was, making the connections with the local like Japanese people that you worked with, and just putting yourself and your culture out there and on the line. So I think that's all that we can ask of anyone in that situation, that, you know, that they just do their best to, you know, do all of those key principles.
Yeah, 100%, Ike.
Yeah. But I know we are running out of time, Luke. Is there any other kind of topics and or shout outs you wanted to share with us?
Let me have a quick thing. Yeah. You've got a little bit more time. You might not know, but I actually broke contract. I don't know if that's something you'd be interested to hear about.
We have a lot of contract breakers, so we would love to hear.
This podcast is mostly contract breakers. I thankfully I'm the shining beacon of following the rules here.
I also broke contract, Luke. I said I was going to reapply, and then I cut it off a little early, but I'd love to hear your situation as well.
Okay, so the conclusion that I came to is actually don't break contracts. Because something that especially if you're going to stay in Japan, something that I underestimated is that the JET program is actually a pretty famous, prestigious program, and people know what it is. And so I did the JET program for 1.5 years, right? And so now on my CV it says 1.5 years. And in interviews, people ask me like, 1.5 years? What? So, and I have to explain to them why I broke contract. And of course I feel I have my reasons, but it doesn't put you in a great position. And sort of the reason I broke contract was that I really wanted to stay in Japan after the JET program. And I had this job opportunity. And I felt a bit like, if I don't take this opportunity, I might not get the opportunity when my contract ends and just have to leave Japan.
Yeah.
And, you know, I had a lot of other sort of annoying things about being a CIR, like, for example, not being invited to the meetings that I wanted to be invited to, and like feeling like the office didn't. So, for example, those picnics I had went wonderfully, but not a single one of like my colleagues would come to see what they looked like, you know, and that was quite frustrating sort of thing. So those sort of things drove me to break contract. But in the end, looking back, I actually wish that I'd gone through my second year, so that when I came to Tokyo, I could, you know, just have this sort of clean CV. Because particularly the Japanese employers, they know what the JET program is, especially if they're like open to employing foreigners, because loads of people interviewing are going to be ex-Jets.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been in a few awkward situations in the interview, especially when like I was interviewing in Japanese, so I can't speak quite as eloquently as I can in English, where I have to sort of explain what were these factors that made me quit the job I promised I was going to do. And that can be difficult. But of course, like this, I think this is a very ESID situation. Every situation is a different situation in that, like, if you do have like this dream job offer, you've got to decide, like, shall I break the JET contract and go for it? Because, you know, if you just got to make every decision. Yeah.
At the end of the day, Luke, that's very MSAS though. So many of the people, even people we have had previously on the podcast, have broken contract for another job in Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, all these major areas that they want to eventually end up in, right? And so even if you do sign another year, what ends up happening is you still want to try to stay in Japan permanently, semi-permanently, for more than the JET program can offer. And when that thought starts, you know, coming across your mind, it does end up in a lot of contract breakers. So you're definitely not alone there as well.
I can't speak to this, but I'm sure people have their reasons.
Yeah.
I certainly, I follow the contracts that I sign. So, but you know, MSAS, right?
Maybe I should soften my advice. Maybe just think very carefully about it should be the advice.
Yeah.
But actually, maybe if I can just add to that though, I had living in a tiny town in Kumamoto. I had this job opportunity come from Tokyo, and because I lived in this tiny town, I was like, oh, a job in Tokyo, wow!
Yeah,
and like it seemed like such a huge thing. And to be honest, I knew in that time that actually that type of job wasn't something that really excited me. But it just seemed like this magical world where, you know, I could move from this tiny town to an actual job in Tokyo where, like, it was a startup and, like, I could wear my own clothes. I could take my computer home. I could work hybrid. Like, all of that sort of flashy stuff really impressed me. And then I started the job and I realized that my gut feeling was right, that wasn't really what I wanted to do. And eventually I've now worked my way into a job which I love. But I went through some really quite difficult times there. And I think not underestimating yourself when you're job hunting is very important, because say you want to go to Tokyo or Osaka or whatever, there are loads of really good jobs that you could do. It's not like this locked out job market where you can only get it if you're Japanese, you can only get it if you speak fluent Japanese. Like, if you're going to look for a job in Japan, take the time to actually look for one that you want to do, because they are out there and you can do them. Like, they're not locked away from you. And when you live in, like, this tiny inaka town so far away from anything, like, even the sniff of a job opportunity in the city can seem very enticing. But yeah, try not to give in to that too much, and try to make sure that, you know, you're really having confidence in yourself and really looking for something that you want to do. And if you're going to break contract to do it, then make sure it's a job that you really want to do, rather than just sort of wanting to move to the city and finish jet.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons people break contract, and I think, like you said, Luke, it's always an internal struggle, right? At the end of the day, whether you should or shouldn't, but it's just up to you and what your long-term goals are in life, right? So yeah. I appreciate you sharing your insight, though.
Yeah, Luke, great advice and interesting perspective.
Yeah. Now, I will say our time has sadly come to an end, Luke. We loved interviewing our first CIR on the Deskwarmers podcast. I would love to quickly shout out from our end as well. We do have a very lively Discord that you can find in our description, where we have a lot of resources for Japan talk, as well as ALT, JET, CIR, any advice. We have an active network there. And then also just following us on all the different social media platforms. But we'll have episodes every week as far as different perspectives about what it is like to live in Japan. So we appreciate you watching.
Like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, and adios.
Yeah. Thank you all. See you next time. Bye, Luke. Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.